Have you ever wondered why the quietest moments after a breakup, or after you finally walk away from someone who never truly saw you, feel heavier than the chaos of the relationship itself? That silence isn't empty. It's the sound of your psyche beginning to speak in a voice you've ignored for years. Today, we're going to listen to that voice together, because what it says will determine whether you repeat the same patterns or finally step into the woman you were born to become. This isn't about swearing off men forever. This is about understanding that abstinence, chosen, deliberate, and temporary, can become the most powerful psychological intervention you've ever given yourself. Carl Jung called this confrontation with the unconscious the beginning of individuation, the process of becoming whole. And wholeness, contrary to every rom-com you've ever watched, rarely begins in someone else's arms. You know the moment I'm talking about. You're lying in bed at 2 a.m., phone face down because you've promised yourself you won't text him. The room is dark, your thoughts are loud, and suddenly every insecurity you've ever buried under makeup, achievements, or his fleeting attention rises to the surface. That's your shadow knocking. Jung described the shadow as the repository of everything we refuse to acknowledge about ourselves: the jealousy, the neediness, the rage, the desperate hunger for validation. Most women spend their 20s and 30s trying to outrun this shadow by attaching themselves to men who reflect it back in distorted forms. He ghosts you and you feel worthless. He love bombs you and you feel worthy. Both reactions belong to the shadow, not to him. The relationship becomes a mirror, but it's cracked. Abstinence removes the mirror entirely, forcing you to look at the original. Let's be clear, this isn't punishment. Seneca wrote that it is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more, who is poor. When you crave male attention to regulate your self-worth, you're psychologically impoverished. You're outsourcing your emotional stability to someone who has no incentive to maintain it. The moment you stop, something remarkable happens. The energy you once spent chasing his validation begins to circulate back into your own system. Psychologists call this self-sourcing. Jung called it integrating the anima, the inner feminine that men project onto women when they haven't done their own work. But here's what most spiritual teachers won't tell you. You can't integrate what you're still giving away. Think about the last man who hurt you. Not the surface level hurt, the deeper wound. The one that made you question whether you're too much or not enough. That wound didn't originate with him. He simply pressed on a bruise that was already there. Modern trauma research shows that early attachment injuries, whether from unavailable parents, early rejections, or cultural messaging about female worth, create neural pathways that light up when we encounter familiar dynamics in adulthood. Your brain literally recognizes the pattern and releases dopamine, the same chemical that makes gambling addictive. This is why "he's just like my dad" isn't a red flag. It's a neurological trap. Abstinence interrupts the circuit. For the first time, the dopamine crash happens without the external trigger, forcing your nervous system to find new ways to self-regulate. You might be thinking, but I'm strong. I don't need a man to feel worthy. Good. Now prove it. Strength isn't the absence of need. It's the ability to meet your needs without compromising your integrity. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." The outside event here is male attention. The real work is noticing how your mind contorts itself to secure it, how you diminish your opinions in conversation, how you apologize for taking up space, how you perform availability even when you're exhausted. These aren't conscious choices. They're unconscious adaptations, survival strategies from a time when female safety depended on male protection. Your nervous system hasn't gotten the memo that you now have your own apartment, income, and deadbolt. The first 30 days of deliberate abstinence are brutal because they reveal the addiction. Not to sex, to significance. You'll feel phantom vibrations from a phone that isn't ringing. You'll craft imaginary conversations in the shower. You'll refresh his Instagram stories like a lab rat pressing a lever for cocaine. This is your shadow work in real time. Jung believed that the shadow contains not just our worst qualities, but our greatest potential. The woman who learns to sit with her craving without acting on it discovers a reservoir of power she never knew existed. She learns that the part of her that feels crazy for wanting connection is actually the part that's been protecting her from abandonment since childhood. When you stop running from that part, you can finally integrate it. Have you ever noticed how your standards plummet the moment you're lonely? That's not weakness. That's biology hijacking psychology. Oxytocin, the bonding hormone, doesn't discriminate between healthy and toxic attachments. Your body just wants to connect. Abstinence teaches you to distinguish between the biological imperative and the psychological pattern. The first time you choose not to text him back, not because you're playing games, but because you're choosing yourself, you'll feel a physical sensation in your chest, not heartbreak. Expansion. That's your anima beginning to breathe on her own. The archetypal mistake women make is confusing the animus, the inner masculine, with actual men. Jung warned that an unintegrated animus leads women to project their strength, protection, and direction onto external partners. When he leaves, you don't just lose a boyfriend, you lose your internal compass. Abstinence forces you to develop that compass yourself. You learn to make decisions without polling friends for male approval. You learn to protect your own boundaries without needing someone else to enforce them. You learn that the voice in your head saying you're being too sensitive isn't divine masculine wisdom. It's internalized patriarchy wearing your father's face. This is where the real alchemy begins. The silence you feared becomes a crucible. Every unacted upon impulse, every night you choose your own company over his chaos, transmutes pain into power. Epictetus said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." Freedom isn't found in the absence of desire. It's found in the ability to observe desire without being enslaved by it. When you can sit with the full intensity of wanting someone and still choose yourself, you've achieved something most people never do: sovereignty over your own emotional landscape. You've made it through the first crucible, the raw exposure of the shadow, and now the silence starts to shift. It's no longer just the absence of his voice. It's the presence of something older, something that was waiting beneath the noise. Jung called this layer the collective unconscious, the reservoir of human experience that shapes every woman's psyche whether she knows it or not. Inside that reservoir swim the archetypes: the mother, the lover, the warrior, the wise woman. Most women live inside one archetype at a time, letting it dictate their choices. The lover chases connection at any cost. The mother sacrifices herself to keep the peace. The warrior fights every battle except the one within. Abstinence doesn't silence these archetypes. It gives you the space to hear which one is speaking and whether she's telling the truth. Have you ever caught yourself rehearsing an argument with a man who isn't even in the room? That's the warrior archetype borrowing your voice. She's convinced that if she just finds the perfect combination of words, he'll finally understand. But understanding was never the goal. Control was. The warrior believes safety comes from winning. The truth is that no one wins an argument with someone who doesn't value your perspective. The real victory is walking away before the fight begins. Abstinence trains you to recognize the moment the warrior grabs the wheel. You feel it in your jaw, in the heat behind your eyes, in the urge to send the paragraph that will set him straight. When you don't send it, something shifts. The energy that would have fueled the battle redirects inward, and for the first time, you ask, what am I actually protecting? Modern attachment theory confirms what Jung intuited. The archetypes are wired into your nervous system through early relationships. If your caregivers were inconsistent, the lover learned to perform perfection to secure love. If they were controlling, the warrior learned to armor up. If they were absent, the mother learned to nurture everyone except herself. These strategies kept you safe as a child, but they sabotage you as an adult. The man who triggers you isn't the problem, he's the messenger. He activates the archetype that's been running the show since you were 5. Abstinence removes the messenger, leaving you alone with the archetype. That's when the real dialogue begins. You'll notice it in small choices. You're at a coffee shop, and a man smiles at you. The lover wants to smile back, to test whether you still have it. The warrior wants to ignore him to prove you don't need it. Both reactions are automatic. Neither is free. The integrated woman pauses. She notices the impulse without acting on it. She asks herself, what do I actually want in this moment? Not what will make me feel safe, not what will make me feel powerful, but what aligns with the woman I'm becoming. That pause is the birth of conscious choice. Seneca wrote, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." The imagination here is the archetype projecting its script onto a stranger's smile. When you refuse to play the role, the script loses power. The collective unconscious doesn't just contain archetypes, it contains myths. The myth you've been living is the one where love requires sacrifice, where being chosen means you're worthy, where his attention is the prize and your singleness is the punishment. Abstinence dismantles the myth by forcing you to live outside its narrative. You stop auditioning for the role of the girl he finally settles for. You stop measuring your days by whether he texted back. You start measuring them by whether you kept your word to yourself. That's when the myth cracks open and reveals its hollowness. Think about the women you admire, truly admire, not the ones you secretly envy. The ones who walk into a room and command respect without trying. They're not louder, prettier, or thinner. They're integrated. Their archetypes aren't fighting for control, they're in council. The lover informs their warmth, the warrior their boundaries, the mother their generosity, the wise woman their discernment. Integration doesn't mean perfection. It means none of the archetypes are exiled. The lover isn't ashamed of wanting connection. The warrior isn't ashamed of needing protection. They take turns speaking, and you, the conscious self, get the final vote. You'll feel this integration in your body before you understand it in your mind. One morning, you'll wake up and realize you didn't check your phone first thing. You'll go an entire weekend without wondering what he's doing. You'll make a decision, big or small, without consulting anyone else. These aren't dramatic moments. They're quiet revolutions. Epictetus taught that circumstances don't define us, they reveal us. The circumstance here is solitude. What it reveals is how much of your identity was borrowed from relationships that never belonged to you. The danger now isn't relapse into old patterns. It's the temptation to replace one archetype with another. Some women, after months of abstinence, crown the warrior queen. They become so good at boundaries that they mistake isolation for strength. They pride themselves on needing no one, forgetting that the goal was never independence but interdependence. The integrated woman doesn't need a man to complete her, but she's not afraid to let one enhance her. The difference is sovereignty. She chooses partnership from overflow, not from deficit. You'll know you're close when solitude stops feeling like punishment and starts feeling like privilege. When you can sit in a restaurant alone without performing nonchalance. When you can watch couples without the stab of envy. When you can receive a compliment without deflecting it or dissecting it for ulterior motives. These moments aren't the end of the journey. They're the proof that the journey is working. The collective unconscious isn't a prison. It's a library. Abstinence gives you the library card. Every archetype is a book you can open, read, and return to the shelf when you're done. The woman who learns to do this becomes the author of her own myth. The next layer waiting beneath the archetypes is the one most women never reach: the self. Jung capitalized it to distinguish it from the ego. The ego wants to be right. The self wants to be whole. The ego collects evidence of its wounds. The self integrates the wounds into wisdom. The ego demands justice from others. The self demands accountability from within. Abstinence has brought you to the threshold of the self, but crossing it requires something the archetypes can't give: surrender. Not to a man, not to a pattern, but to the process of becoming someone you don't yet recognize. The threshold of the self is quieter than the shadow and subtler than the archetypes. It doesn't announce itself with drama or craving. It arrives in the ordinary moments when you realize you're no longer performing for an invisible audience. You're folding laundry and you catch yourself smiling, not because someone might walk in, but because the warmth of the fabric in your hands is enough. That's the self tasting its own presence. Jung described the self as the center of the total personality, the point where conscious and unconscious meet without conflict. Most women never reach this center because they keep outsourcing the meeting place to relationships. A man becomes the arena where they hope to resolve their inner splits. Abstinence relocates the arena to the only place it was ever meant to be: inside your own skin. You've already felt the first tremor of this relocation. Remember the night you almost texted him, then didn't? The part of you that expected applause for your restraint was the ego. The part that simply closed the phone and went to sleep was closer to the self. The ego needs witnesses. The self needs none. Modern self-worth psychology calls this intrinsic validation, the ability to affirm your own value without external data points. But intrinsic validation isn't a skill you acquire. It's a residue left behind when you stop seeking extrinsic proof. Every day you choose not to chase, flirt, or fix someone else's perception of you, a little more residue accumulates. Over months, it hardens into something unbreakable, a baseline sense of worth that no one can deposit into or withdraw from. Have you noticed how your dreams have changed? In the early weeks of abstinence, they were probably populated by him. Chases, arguments, reconciliations. Now the cast is different. You're climbing mountains alone. You're speaking in rooms where no one interrupts. You're finding objects you lost years ago. Jung believed dreams are the unconscious processing what consciousness can't yet hold. These new dreams aren't fantasies of escape. They're blueprints of integration. The mountain is the climb from ego to self. The uninterrupted speech is the voice you're learning to trust. The lost objects are fragments of identity you abandoned to be palatable. The dream isn't telling you to achieve these things, it's showing you they're already yours, waiting to be claimed in waking life. The Stoics understood this claiming process better than most therapists. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be one." Replace man with woman, and the instruction is identical. The good woman isn't the one who finally lands the healthy relationship, she's the one who becomes healthy enough that the relationship is optional. This is where abstinence stops being a tactic and becomes a revelation. You discover that the qualities you were seeking in a partner, consistency, respect, emotional availability, were never his to give. They were yours to embody. The moment you embody them, the external search loses urgency. You're no longer auditioning partners to play the role of your missing half. You're auditioning them to see if they can keep pace with someone who's already whole. You'll test this wholeness in unexpected ways. A coworker compliments your work, and you accept it without deflection. A friend cancels plans, and you feel disappointment without self-blame. A man you're attracted to doesn't text back, and you notice the urge to shrink, then watch it pass without acting on it. Each of these moments is a stress test for the self. The ego fails by personalizing every outcome. The self passes by observing the outcome without merging with it. Epictetus said, "Men are disturbed not by things, but by the views they take of them." The thing here is male attention, or its absence. The view you're dismantling is the one that equates your value with his response time. The deeper you move into the self, the more you'll confront what Jung called the mana personality, the inflated sense of specialness that arises when you first taste psychological power. Some women, after months of abstinence and integration, begin to believe they're above human needs. They mistake emotional regulation for emotional superiority. They start to see men as projects to fix, or children to manage. This is the shadow wearing spiritual clothing. The self doesn't transcend connection, it transforms it. The integrated woman doesn't need less love, she needs better containers for it. She learns to give love without losing herself and to receive love without proving herself. You'll know you've slipped into the mana personality when solitude starts to feel like a throne instead of a workshop. When you catch yourself judging other women for still chasing men. When you secretly believe your abstinence makes you more evolved. The correction is simple but brutal. Remember the nights you cried into your pillow at 3 a.m. Remember the version of you who refreshed his profile 60 times in an hour. That woman isn't gone. She's integrated. The self contains both the desperate girl and the sovereign woman, not one or the other. Humility isn't self-diminishment, it's accurate memory. The final frontier of abstinence isn't independence, it's interdependence. The self doesn't isolate, it discriminates. You'll feel the difference when you meet someone new. The old pattern would have been immediate fusion, sharing your trauma on date 2, mirroring his interests, adjusting your schedule. The new pattern is calibrated curiosity. You ask questions without needing his answers to define you. You share selectively, not strategically. You notice his inconsistencies without trying to correct them. You feel attraction without the compulsion to secure it. This isn't game playing, it's gravity. The self has its own center, so it doesn't orbit anyone else's. The ultimate test comes when you're tempted to end abstinence prematurely. Not with the toxic ex, that pull is obvious, but with someone decent. Someone who texts back, who plans dates, who seems to see you. The self recognizes the temptation not as danger, but as data. It asks, Am I ending abstinence because I'm whole or because I'm afraid wholeness will be lonely? The integrated woman can answer honestly. She knows loneliness isn't the absence of company, it's the presence of inauthenticity. She'd rather sit in honest solitude than perform in a relationship. This isn't rigidity, it's fidelity to the process. The self doesn't promise eternal singleness, it promises eternal choice. When you operate from this center, relationships stop being salvation and start being enhancement. You'll enter them the way you enter a beautiful museum, grateful for the art, aware you don't need to own it to appreciate it. You'll leave them the way you leave the museum, enriched, not emptied. The man who earns a place beside the self isn't a savior or a project. He's a co-creator. He's earned the privilege of witnessing a woman who no longer needs witnessing to know she exists. The self is not a destination you reach and then rest inside. It is a dynamic center that keeps expanding as long as you keep choosing it. The moment you believe you've arrived, the ego sneaks back in wearing the self's clothing. This is why the next phase of abstinence feels paradoxically harder than the beginning. The early weeks were fueled by raw survival instinct. Don't text him, don't collapse, don't repeat the pattern. Now the instinct is quieter and the choices are subtler. You're no longer avoiding disaster, you're curating a life. The danger shifts from relapse into old wounds to complacency inside new strength. Jung called this the enantiodromia, the tendency of any psychological extreme to flip into its opposite. The woman who once chased validation can become the woman who rejects connection altogether, mistaking discernment for destiny. You feel this shift in the way your body responds to possibility. 6 months ago, a man's attention lit up your nervous system like a fire alarm. Now a decent man shows interest, and your first sensation is assessment. Not excitement, not fear, but a calm inventory. Does this align with my values? Does this expand my life or contract it? The assessment isn't cold, it's sovereign. You're no longer reacting to chemistry, you're evaluating compatibility. Modern relationship research calls this differentiation, the ability to stay connected to your own needs while staying connected to another person. Differentiation isn't natural, it's earned through the exact friction abstinence provides. Every time you chose yourself over the dopamine hit of new romance, you strengthened the muscle of differentiation. Have you noticed how your friendships have changed? The women who once bonded with you over dating horror stories now feel distant. The conversations that used to feel like solidarity now feel like stagnation. This isn't arrogance, it's alignment. The self attracts and repels in equal measure. It attracts people who are also doing their work, women who text you about their boundaries, not their breakups. It repels people who need you to stay small so they can stay comfortable. The loss stings, but it's surgical. You're not cutting people out of cruelty, you're making space for relationships that match your frequency. Seneca wrote, "Associate with people who are likely to improve you." The improvement isn't moral, it's energetic. You can't integrate the self while surrounded by dynamics that reinforce the shadow. The deeper you move into this phase, the more you'll confront what psychologists call upper limit problems. The concept is simple. Your psyche has a set point for how much joy, success, or intimacy it believes you're allowed. When you exceed that set point, say by feeling genuinely content without a partner, your unconscious sabotages you. You pick a fight with a friend, you binge on junk food, you flirt with someone clearly unavailable just to feel the familiar ache. The sabotage isn't punishment, it's regulation. Your nervous system is trying to return you to the emotional temperature it knows. Abstinence teaches you to override the thermostat. You notice the sabotage impulse, name it, and let it pass without acting on it. Each override raises the set point a degree. You'll feel this recalibration in your relationship to time. Early abstinence crawled. Every hour without contact felt like a week. Now time accelerates. Weeks blend into months and you realize you haven't thought about him, any him, in days. The absence isn't cold, it's spacious. You start projects you used to postpone because you were waiting for a partner to co-create them. You travel alone and discover you prefer your own rhythm. You invest in skills that have nothing to do with attractiveness and everything to do with mastery. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "At dawn, when you have trouble getting out of bed, tell yourself, 'I have to go to work,' as a human being." Your work now is living as a fully human woman, not as a woman in waiting. The archetypal temptation at this stage is the wise woman inflation. She's the version of you who reads one too many Jung books and starts dispensing advice like a guru. She quotes Rumi at brunch and diagnoses everyone's shadow. She's intoxicating until she's insufferable. The wise woman isn't wrong, she's incomplete. Wisdom without embodiment is performance. The integrated woman doesn't just understand the theory of boundaries. She lives them. She doesn't just quote Stoicism, she practices it when the barista gets her order wrong, and she chooses not to correct him because her peace isn't contingent on coffee. The self isn't a persona you adopt, it's a frequency you maintain. You'll know you're stabilizing in this frequency when rejection stops registering as evidence against you. A man you like chooses someone else, and your first thought isn't, "What's wrong with me?" but "What's right with him that doesn't align with me?" The question isn't semantic, it's seismic. It shifts the locus of evaluation from your worth to your fit. This is the difference between ego and self. The ego needs to be chosen to prove it exists. The self exists regardless of who chooses it. The practical outcome is freedom. You stop contorting yourself to fit someone else's puzzle. You start building your own. The final integration happens in the body, not the mind. You've done the shadow work, balanced the archetypes, stabilized the self. Now the nervous system catches up. You stop bracing for the other shoe to drop. You stop scanning rooms for threats. You stop apologizing for taking up space. Trauma research shows that embodied safety, what Bessel van der Kolk calls neuroception of safety, is the prerequisite for secure attachment. You can't attach securely to another person until your body believes it's safe to attach to itself. Abstinence creates the conditions for this neuroception. Every night you go to bed without negotiating your worth with someone else, your vagus nerve learns a new baseline. Over time, your resting heart rate drops, your sleep deepens, your immune system strengthens. The body votes with physiology, "I am home." This embodied safety is what allows you to end abstinence without losing yourself. The woman who ends abstinence from the self doesn't rush into the first available relationship. She waits for the rare overlap. Someone who is also doing their work, who sees her without needing to possess her, who enhances her life without becoming its center. The wait isn't passive, it's active discernment. She dates with the same sovereignty she cultivated in solitude. She notices red flags without moralizing them. She feels attraction without fusing. She ends things cleanly when they no longer align, without villainizing the other person. This isn't high standards, it's high alignment. The ultimate fruit of abstinence isn't a perfect relationship. It's an unshakable relationship with yourself. You become the safe person you were always looking for. You become the consistent presence you begged him to be. You become the emotional home you kept trying to build in someone else's arms. Epictetus said, "Don't explain your philosophy, embody it." The embodied philosophy of abstinence is simple. Your worth is not negotiable, your peace is not conditional, and your love is not a transaction. When you live this truth, relationships stop being the arena where you prove yourself and start being the arena where you express yourself. You now hold the power to choose partners from overflow, not deficit. You enter connections with open hands, not clenched fists. You leave them with gratitude, not grievance. You are no longer afraid of being alone because you are no longer alone with a stranger. You are alone with a woman you trust completely. This is emotional freedom. This is self-sovereignty. This is the inner peace that no one can give you and no one can take away. You don't need a man to be whole. You need a man who is whole enough not to break you.